If reality shifting is actually a thing, and I am building a case that it is, as well as others, then how many Elon Musks are there? Or better put, how many versions of you are there? And how does reality shifting work? You see, it was a couple days ago, and I thought to myself, and I've had this thought before, I wonder if Elon Musk exists in all of the planes of existence because he's such a powerhouse of a figure. And what I've noticed is that as you are shifting realities, the world stage stays the same, but there are key differences. Like some people get tried for corruption, some companies go out of existence at some point. There are scandals in some and not in others. But the politics and the structure of society and the main figureheads are predominantly the same. But what I find interesting is that early on in my journey, when I was shifting in and out of nightmare realms, I was shifting in one where I wasn't in a nightmare, but I couldn't go to them because it wasn't safe. And so they were coaching me from afar. And I don't know what time point they existed in, but they told me something very interesting, which was take screenshots of the headlines and news articles, and also to look for the Easter eggs, which I now adopt in my coaching practice and helping people identify the Easter eggs. It's really fun, actually, once you do that. And I'm so grateful I got that advice because it is such a great mindset adjustment. If you're really struggling, especially if you're in some dark places, then keeping your eyes out for the Easter eggs, the strange things that indicate that you're reality shifting, is like a break in the clouds and is such a powerful motivation boost. Even if you don't talk to anybody about it, you're just like, yes, okay, it's still working. I just have to be patient, Anyway, so I received advice to start looking at the news articles and also advertisements, but I haven't really saved the advertisements. And sure enough, I noticed a theme, a pretty unexpected theme, I have to say, where as I was shifting, the news article headlines would change. And so I was able to use this as a KPI and load it up on my CNN and BBC website. And I don't care what anybody says about the mainstream news, when you're reality shifting, it is a great tool. Because what you'll find is that technology is different, it progresses differently. And most fascinating, if you pick a couple of the figureheads, and one of mine was Elon Musk, and you look at the photos, it almost looks like there are different people. And their bodies are a little bit different. And it's hard to characterize. And you never really know if somebody's using an old photo. But you just kind of get this intuitive sense. It's kind of like I look at photos of Biden, and I mentioned this in my Are We Preparing for Revolution series on YouTube. And I noticed discernible changes in his demeanor and the way he looks. And I don't know, I don't really follow him. He's not one of my figureheads that I follow. But I noticed a similar type of theme that I do with Elon Musk. And I've always felt that there were a couple of reality layers where he was in the know, and the same with Grimes. Because if you listen to the way that they talk in some of their interviews, and I love Lex Fridman podcasts because you really get to know people, and they're long. It's like an investment, right? To watch the Lex Fridman podcast, but they're totally worth it. All of them that I've seen have been very in-depth, and they give you a feel of the person. And I think Joe Rogan also does a really good job too at pulling out the real persona. And so you can learn a lot, by listening to people and listening to their language. And that's not to say that they are in the know, but there have just been some passing comments, especially related to AI and the future, that makes me feel like they, even if it's just intuition and not in their conscious mind, at the subconscious level, they know the direction of where we're going. And so then if you agree with that direction, then you can align with that figurehead. And I mean, don't violate their privacy. I heard a story about somebody jumping a fence and getting on personal property, and like, that's just weird. That's like stuff for the birds. So don't do any weird shit like that, right? But align yourself energetically and align yourself with your intent of where you want to go. And I believe that if there is a ship out of here to another collective or to a future collective where things are ethical, where things are pleasing, not that there won't be turmoil along the way, but aligning with figureheads who you intentionally agree with, I think is a really great strategy when you're reality shifting. Because I received a listener question when I was thinking about this again, and I think it was like the same day. It was the same day. And I love you guys and gals and my non-binary listeners. There's the questions and the conversations that I have with you are just incredible. And I'm just delighted. I'm just so delighted to have my work appreciated, and then to have other people on the journey too. Like, I have somebody who reached out to me who was in a nightmare realm, and it's like I could almost hear them from the hole, like, help me, I'm in a nightmare. Anyway, so they got out, and they recently contacted me again and said, hey, by the way, I can move stuff with my mind where I'm at. Do you want me to give you some tips? And I was like, please, because I will share it with my listeners. And so when I hear back, then I'll share that story with you. And then I also heard from somebody something similar. And anyway, so it's just a really, I'm just having a great time. Anyway, so, all right, that's the love. So this listener asked, how does it work? And in full disclosure, I'm still figuring it out, but I'm going to give you my working theory, and it's really complex. And this is the August 2023 edition, and so things are going to change as I assimilate more information and synthesize different pieces. But let's look at the teachings in the mainstream society as a whole. A couple things that we know is that we are fundamentally energy. Physics, hard science is backing this up. Like, when you get down to the very, very intricate layer of the smallest particles of our universe, it's fundamentally a vibratory energy. Now, in parallel, in tandem, we have people on the metaphysical side that have been saying this for years. And scientists like myself have never really heeded much attention to them, like before I was awake. Now that I'm awake, I'm bridging both, and I see that there's something to that. And I think that this is fundamentally important when we talk about reality shifting, because the way I have it conceptualized right now is that, those hand fans that you can like wave yourself when it's really hot. Well, traditionally, and I'm thinking of a Chinese one, and I don't know why, but it's got this beautiful decor that reminds me of like emperors in China. And it folds up, right? And on the edge of the handles, it has this black plastic or some type of ivory or some type of natural material. And then at the very base of it, you hold it in your palm. Where you're holding it in your palm is you. and your consciousness, your seed of consciousness. And when the fan is closed, that represents you in the unconscious or the binary state of mind, meaning that there's predominantly only one plane of existence in your life. And I feel that where we're at, there are a majority of people that are like this and will be like this for the remainder of their lives. And I think that that's okay, because every seed sprouts at a different time, and we don't have to go and make people sprout. But for those who are naturally sprouting, the fan starts to open, but it doesn't open all the way, right? Not at first, if we're thinking about it sequentially. And we are in space and time, so we should think about it sequentially. And so as you open the fan, you notice this accordion effect to where the paper is squished on itself like in 3 predominant chunks. And so now you have available to you 3 reality layers, or lifelines is another way to think about it, that you can traverse. You're anchored into the middle one, and you have an option of moving to the left or moving to the right. And how you move to the left and to the right is contingent upon your energy, because when we think about the order of the universe, when we think about the construction of the universe, we need to think about the materialization of matter, which means we need to think about everything from the macro to the micro and then to the subatomic. And I believe that there is something really, really important about the congruence of all of our behavior, our actions, our mindset, our psychology, our unconscious, our subconscious, our energy, our life force. Like how we are as a being is more than just our mind, right? It's more than just our heart. We are actually going through life with this vibrating essence around us. And as a result, that changes the lanes that attach to us. And as we start to progress in our journey and our consciousness expands, then all of a sudden that fan, which was slowly opening to 3 lanes, now opens to 4 to 5 to 9 and to some number. And I don't know what the limit is and if there is a limit. But when we go back to where the seed started to sprout, where your consciousness started to sprout, and where the fan started to open, we need to think about this from a probabilistic perspective. What is the most likely lifelines? What are the most likely lifelines that are waiting for you? And that's where we need to dig into the psyche, and we need to dig into the unconscious patterns. And that's what the previous episode was about, because great masters like Carl Jung have spent their entire careers, and he's passed, but there's so much great work that came out of his everything. There's been a foundational series of understandings that have led us to understand that the human mind, even Freud, and I know Freud is a little controversial, he's not always well liked now in modern day, and some of his teachings are a little odd. I completely agree with that. But the idea that there's this id, there's this child inside of you, I want, and I'm mad. And then there's this ego and the superego. These symbolic categorizations are really powerful for understanding how we subconsciously create reality. And Jung learned from Freud and disagreed with him and created his own system. And even though he names it different, he talks about this unconscious shadow that, if you're not careful, permeates through your entire life. And so when you are early in the sprouting, and I see this almost without exception, and I've talked about my frustration with this before, is that before you're really awake, predominantly the realities that you have built that are queued up and attached to you, right? Because you've been manifesting your entire life. And so you have reality layers that are already attached to you, ready for you to anchor into. And so when you're early in that process, they're predominantly a reflection of your unhealed wounds and your shadow self, because that's 95% of your programming, and the 5% of you that's conscious, that's in charge, the superego, that's like trying to be a better person, is still actually ruled by this underwater depth that needs to be explored. And so, as a result, what happens is that when you start reality shifting, this is a theory, and I need more data and to understand if this is really how it is across many, many people. But from everything that I've seen, the first couple of realities are kind of shitty. It's like once you realize you have options, then you're like, oh, cool, I have options. And you're like, wait a second, these options there's like a delay, there's a lag effect. And I haven't figured out why that is. And I need to interrogate how big the lag effect is for other people. But it's way longer than I think it needs to be, which is why I've spent time working on the back end with some intergalactic friends and allies to see if we can adjust this process, because it's really convoluted. And so there's a process of clearing that needs to take place first, where you need to be faced with the same decisions. I know, I'm sorry. Nobody likes to hear that they still have shadow work left, It's just, from my perspective, from my vantage point, I haven't seen anybody immune from it. But we'll get to alternative explanations in just a moment. So there's a process of clearing, because you have all of these reality layers and lifelines that are ready for you to catalyze. And that's why manifestation teachers in the metaphysical community have been teaching this for years. It has seemed like magic when it works for people, because all of a sudden it's like something pops into their reality and they're like, whoa, it was actually, I believe, ready for them, or they had done the work to cue it up. And so then it was like effortless for them to step into that reality, because in that fan that was opening, it was maybe the left lane or maybe the right lane. And so they just glided into it. But when you are trying to do a major shift, then you have to clear the rainbow, you have to clear the fan, and then you have to reattach and reassemble new lifelines to you. And that takes a lot of work and time, particularly if you're stuck in nightmares, right? And so it's not a lockstep dance where just because you want to, then reality conforms to your wants. And this is also why I feel like some of the manifestation teachers tell you not to be attached to the outcome. Like, it has to look like this. Because when you do that, you lower the probability, you lower the odds that those fan spoking points that are connected to you are exactly as you imagine. And so then you create a barrier to that new reality attaching onto you, that material world attaching onto you. You create a barrier because you're like, well, it's got to look like this, and I have to work for this company, or I need this bride, I need this. And when meanwhile, you are actually subconsciously manifesting other things, or you have other things that are trying to come to you and they can't come to you because you're already tethered. And so as a result, you have to untether yourself or let go of the fan and create a new fan. And I believe that the power of the mind and the power of the energy and the power of vibration is what actually aggregates the matter together. I've mentioned cymatics before, and it's like when we speak and the energy that we carry in our auric field, when that is in alignment with our intent, with our behavior, with especially higher ideals, then it actually reconstructs the world around us in the immaterial. And then there's this processing time for it to be catalyzed and for it to materialize in front of your eyes. And the process for which it does that varies per person and varies on whether or not you're really in alignment. But it's like the world actually will shift. And then you will shift into another lane, a nearby lane. Now, a big question that I have about this is how many bodies do we have? How many avatars? How many Elon Musks are out there running around? Right? How many versions of you are out there right now, ready for you to interact with, ready for you to shift into? And this has always perplexed me because it does appear that people experience friends and family differently, myself included. They even look different. The skin tone looks different. It's like I saw my mom, and 2 weeks later, it was like I was looking at another version of her that had more plumpness, and her skin looked healthier, and she looked a little more affluent, like it was really weird, and her eyes were different, kind of scary. That was a nightmare realm. And others that have gone through nightmare realms experience their family also differently, like clones, or aggressive or subversive. But when we're not traveling through the nightmare realms, it's like my family is pretty consistent, but I just video chat with them. And so there's not as many big changes. And I also have to say that when I was traveling through some of the nightmare realms, I shifted into other versions of my body that had different things, like different markings. And one in particular I shifted into that had like tape, like hospital tape is what I rationalized, but I don't know if that's actually what it was. But on my neck, it looked like I had been intubated and that somebody had peeled off the tape and I still had some of the adhesive on, while I was also accessing with my conscious mind that version of my body that was in a hospital bed that was drugged. And some pretty unsavory things were happening. I don't want to plant ideas in your mind, so I'm not going to tell you what they were. But I could feel that I wasn't respected there. And it felt like I popped into a version of my body, but I wasn't in a hospital. So there's question marks of how that makes sense, right? Because there's a break in continuity. If I did have a body that was in a hospital bed that was intubated, that was still fresh with adhesive tape on, and I could feel my conscious mind getting closer to that body, it seemed like the predominant linearity effect was that my experience in the desert, driving my car and hiking out in the desert, was preserved over me shifting my psyche into a hospital. But during some major shift events, I was in a hospital separately, and I shifted beds. But those are more like I lost consciousness and briefly, and then I came into another version of the hospital and another version of the bed. And that happened a couple of times, where also in a different hospital, there was this rhythmic activity with my brain waves. It really felt like there was some magnet nearby. It was really intense. It was a lot. I thought it was too much. I thought it was too high powered, and I lost consciousness. And the next time that I came to, I was in a wheelchair being pushed by a orderly type of person who I was frightened of. And the last memory I had was that I was being pulled out of a tube. Like my body was in some preservation tank, some sensory deprivation tank, but my conscious mind was out roaming in another version of my body. Something happened, and so then they rebooted me in another version of my form, pulled me out of a tank, and stabilized me. So I share that to say those are really big jumps and really big events that happened, and my perception was that I was around people who knew what was going on, and they were very well acquainted with the experience of reality shifting. But on the surface, the facilities were benign, so it was kind of all unspoken. Most of you are not going to be doing that level of reality shifting. And I don't even do that level of reality shifting now. Now I just do like little micro shifts, and you don't have to do full jumps to have a reality shifting experience. So the point is that there are some scenarios where I do think that we have different avatar bodies. And I still have question marks about the safety, security, and benevolence of some of those attached worlds, because I didn't always feel safe. I didn't always feel respected. And then separately, there's a whole host of reality shifting experiences that seem to be generated from your mind, where your body is the same. And it's like you are reorienting the world around you, that you then shift with your conscious mind and your body into. That seems to be a separate type of reality shifting that is more broad. Like a lot of people are experiencing that, where it's like they are literally manifesting a world in front of their eyes. I believe that it's catalyzing the matter that is orienting around their auric field, and that there are a couple of potentials that are hovering nearby that they can choose to preferentially materialize, and through a series of steps and processes. But we'll talk about that more in depth later. So if you would like to work one-on-one, I do reality coaching, and I'd love to potentially work with you. Feel free to give me a shout. My email is sacredjourneyproductions@gmail.com.